Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to present to you this year's annual report, which covers the period 1 November 2019 to 31 October 2020. I think before going into the substance of the report, it should be noted that this has been an exceptional year in more ways than one. When we were here convened 1 year ago in Geneva and having made a few modifications to our processes, a couple of key votes and welcome new board members, very few of us, if any, could have anticipated what 2020 was going to offer us and the challenges that we were going to be confronted with in this particular calendar year, and I dare say going into 2021 and 2022 as well. What I will note, however, is that we did actually have a Future Security Trends workshop on day one of our plenary last year, and pandemics were mentioned as one of the potential risks that we need to sort of watch out for and manage. But little did we anticipate it was only going to be a few months away. So naturally, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, the report this year will focus in large part on how we have adapted to managing our activities throughout this period, to fully implement our mandate and reach our purpose, and to keep working with our members and other stakeholders to raise the standards within the private security industry and to ensure the appropriate level of oversight, verification, as well as accountability for any wrongdoings and abuses of the code of conduct. Allow me then, Mr. Chair, to go through some of the elements that we have included in our annual report. And I will ask, please, all board members to mute their microphones so we can avoid any feedback. Okay. Thank you. So this year's annual report would be made available online at the end of the annual General Assembly and would be more detailed than the current presentation. But I'm more than happy to field a few questions and provide some answers at the end of this presentation. Mr. Chair, the five, I think, key points that we should just note, and some of them you have already alluded to in your opening remarks, with regard to the impact of COVID-19 on our operations, but not only in terms of how the association has been operating, but all key stakeholder groups that are part of our work and our endeavors. The first point to note, the Secretariat, like all of you as part of the COVID-19 pandemic, was directly impacted and affected by the crisis, by lockdowns, the international travel restrictions, and so on. At the same time as lockdowns occurred here in Switzerland, in the same week, actually, we were moving offices as well. So we had a double task of installing a new office environment and then starting to work remotely. Despite the challenges of the pandemic and the lockdowns and restrictions, the Secretariat has remained fully functional throughout the reporting period and has fulfilled all of its key objectives, with the exception, of course, of international field missions and in-country visits of security companies and our members and affiliates in different locations. We had to suspend 3 missions or 4 missions to Democratic Republic of Congo, Guatemala, Honduras, and Haiti as lockdowns took effect in March of this year. We do not anticipate any international travel until at least Q2 2021, based on our present predictions with regard to the evolution of the pandemic and the safe travel restriction being lifted. Secondly, Mr. Chair, as you mentioned, with regards to private security companies and in particular our members and affiliates, this has been in many ways a challenging year for them as well, for a number of reasons, which we'll go into in a bit more detail in our annual report, but have also been discussed during many of the webinars and podcasts and at the board level over the past few months. We have certainly seen an economic impact for many security companies in terms of the drying up of international clients in a number of high-risk locations. Major questions with regard to the duty of care owed to the personnel of security companies as well as to their clients. Questions of welfare, physical as well as psychological, and then all of the restrictions that security contractors had to manage because of the lockdowns and travel restrictions. No doubt we will have an opportunity to discuss more of these during the course of the week during the pillar sessions and amongst our members and affiliates. We should also note, of course, that in many locations, private security companies became essential workers or were labeled as essential workers, therefore had important roles to play in helping the authorities manage the lockdowns as well as restrictions and handling elements of the pandemic. And this naturally gave rise to a number of issues, not only with regard to the welfare and well-being of security personnel and their families and their clients, but a number of other issues with regard to new technologies being made available, their interaction with communities, and the new skill sets, as well as protective equipment that were required by security companies operating in those environments. The civil society organizations' impact was likewise felt in many of the environments where we work and amongst many of our members. In particular, of course, they had the financial and funding challenges that for many organizations became exacerbated during this particular period. Secondly, in a number of countries where already there were weak security situations, poor or a lack of good governance and complex environments in particular, we saw a restriction of the civic space, the ability for civil society organizations to monitor and to carry out their mandates in their full capacity. And we saw as such a limited oversight, potentially in terms of security concerns in a number of complex environments where the COVID-19 pandemic was taking effect and where the governments were more autocratic than democratic. With regard to governments, likewise, governments, their focus naturally for most governments was on prioritizing their response and adapting to the pandemic and dealing with the crisis on their national borders with their citizens abroad, but also as part of their funding programs. The priority for most governments was focused on managing COVID-19 during the pandemic. And of course, this took the light away from potentially other issues in the human rights field and potential question marks that we may have had with regard to substandard security operations in a number of countries and locations. Part of our reaction in that regard naturally has been to improve our own communication and profiling issues and strengthen our monitoring where we could to ensure that the issues of human rights, security and governance did not fall by the wayside despite the COVID-19 pandemic. And last but not least, which tags on to my last point in terms of human rights, we naturally saw during the management of the crisis during the reporting period that the question of respect for human rights was high on the agenda. As much as it may have been forgotten in the initial stages of the pandemic, as everyone went into a crisis mode to handle the fallout and consequences of COVID-19 in their locations and on their territories, the past few months have clearly demonstrated that it is in particular in times of crisis such as pandemics that the question of respect for human rights is that much more important and that more efforts are required by all to maintain a level of transparency, oversight and accountability which is required in all of these locations. So Mr. Chair, we have adapted accordingly during this period. We have fulfilled our mandate to the extent that we could with some modifications in terms of the international travel. And we've also brought us greater focus on certain key issues which are developed in the course of the report and during the course of the week. Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the board, we should recall that the work of the association is guided by its strategic plan. It's 2019-2023 strategic plan adopted re-last year. As we indicated in the strategic plan, it is an evergreen document which will be reviewed on an annual basis to re-emphasize certain priorities, to reassess the direction of the organization if needed, and to assess where we can strengthen any potential gaps in the fulfillment of our strategic goals and objectives. Naturally, with the 2019 plan being at a different time to the 2020 pandemic situation, we have had to look again at the key objectives and see how we could adapt to the pandemic situation and to the crisis to ensure that nonetheless we are fulfilling our requirements and the 4 goals which come within the plan. As an overall comment, I would indicate that the 4 goals that you find in the strategic plan remain unchanged, and they're as relevant today as they were when we adopted them in 2019. The first goal, building the capacity of private security companies to implement the code of conduct and to become certified members of ICoCA, as naturally so remains as relevant as it was in 2019 as it is now and remains unchanged. And I'll give you more details about certification numbers and capacity building efforts during the course of this presentation. Goal number 2, building upon and continuing to develop effective systems for evaluating compliance with the code of conduct and addressing non-compliance remains unchanged Likewise, as important as goal 1 in these particular times where, as I mentioned previously, human rights issues and civic space were restricted in a number of locations. Goal number 3, the diversification and expansion of ICoCA's membership, not only through the applications that we have received, but certainly through our efforts with security companies, government, civil societies, and our engagement with all key stakeholders has been one of the priorities this year, with international travel having been restricted. And it's certainly an area where we have seen important growth in terms of footprint. And last but not least, the developing and protecting distinct and credible worldwide brand reflecting ICoCA's leadership role remains unchanged, and part of our communication efforts this year in partnership with key stakeholders has been very much focused on ensuring that that so-called branding of the association as a reference within the security industry and within the human rights community is strengthened and develops in terms of its awareness as well as understanding in different parts of the world. Mr. Chair, very quickly in terms of the ICoCA membership situation, and no doubt some of these will be touched upon during the course of the week. We are still with 7 government members, and as reflected in the strategic plan, there is clearly a need to increase the number of government members that join the association. The 7 member governments have been very active, and wish to note, of course, the presence of the 3 government members on the board who have helped drive and shape the association over the past few years, and in particular in 2020 during this crisis period. Civil society organizations number 39, located in 18 different countries, and 6 new CSO members have joined in 2020. And again, we have worked with many civil society organizations to develop their capacity and understanding of private security issues and human rights related concerns with regards to the operations of private security companies in certain locations. And we presently have 94 industry members and affiliates, of which 29 are certified, 59 are transitional members, and there are 6 affiliates. They're operating in 83 different countries, including 9 maritime locations. And in 2020, 19 new companies have joined from 15 different countries. We can clearly note, Mr. Chair, that there has not been a slowdown in terms of the number of applications and expressions of interest coming our way from potential new members and affiliates across at least the civil society and industry pillars. And we're also engaging more forcefully with potential observers and have seen a growth in the number of observers joining the association in 2020. Clearly, it will be fair to say that we're seeing a growth in the recognition of the importance of working with the private security industry to raise the standards within the private security industry and to ensure that at all times private security companies, in particular those operating in complex environments, are applying their operations and procedures in line with international standards, such as those contained within the International Code of Conduct. These are the logos of the 29 or so security companies that have so far become certified by the association, and the full details are available on our website as well as in our annual report. Capacity building, Mr. Chair, which is one of the important areas for the association. I think we need to remind ourselves, as I pause for a second, that the association's work is very much driven towards a positive raising of the standards within the security industry. This means working with security companies to ensure that not only do they fully integrate the International Code of Conduct and the key principles within their operations and activities and day-to-day management of their operations, but they also understand what it means to integrate those principles. So we're going beyond simply ticking a box and recognizing the existence of policies and procedures. Through our work, and in particular by focusing on key areas of the code, we're looking also to build a capacity within the security companies to understand and to be much more pragmatic in terms of their implementation of the Code of Conduct. And this is particularly important given the dynamics within the human rights world and the number of issues which are coming to the forefront in terms of main areas and priorities for governments. PSCA in particular was one of the areas that the association focused on for the past couple of years, having issued its guidance on PSCA last year for security companies, the first of its kind. And during the reporting period, we have been very active in working with security contractors, and some of the details are here on our particular slide and in more detail in our report, to ensure that they understand which components of the PSCA a guidance they need to introduce more fully into the procedures and activities, where there might be gaps in terms of understanding, and any particular best practices that could be developed to see how we manage such situations. We're looking to develop an online training module early next year on PSCA for our private security companies. And naturally, we have also been working closely with some of our partners, including members of our board, on the Women, Peace and Security agenda to ensure that PSCA is part of that reflection. I would encourage all our member companies and affiliates to keep showing the level of interest and in integrating PSCA into their work, and to keep providing us the kind of feedback that is essential to help continuing build the capacity of our membership and raising standards. A second point to mention as part of this summary presentation of the annual report has been our work on this year's company self-assessment. As a reminder to all participants, this is a mandatory task for our security company members as well as affiliates. It's an annual process which starts in the summer, in July each year, runs for about 2.5 months. And as part of this process, we provide tailored feedback to our security company members and affiliates, engage in robust discussions if there are areas where we think improvement can be taken on board. And for those companies that fail to fulfill their mandatory requirement to finish and to submit the company self-assessment, those companies will be terminated. This year, over approximately 90% of the security companies that are members and affiliates of the association completed the CSA. 7 companies were terminated due to non-submission, and we have provided tailored feedback to all of our companies so far. And Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I would also note that we have received some very positive feedback from a number of our security company members and affiliates with regard to the kind of tailored feedback that we're providing, which allowed them to better understand what it actually takes in a sort of practical and pragmatic sense to integrate fully the code of conduct into their practices, into the procedures, and as part of the oversight and accountability mechanisms. And we're also receiving very positive feedback from security company members and affiliates in terms of how we can improve our own capacity building efforts with them to ensure there's a greater awareness and dissemination of the importance of respecting the International Code of Conduct. Next year's CSA will be rolled out around the same period, and naturally will add some additional human rights indicators as part of that CSA verification process. During the reporting period, Mr. Chair, we did carry out at the end of last year, before the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of field missions, crucial ones in our mind, which included South Sudan, Northern Kenya, as well as Tanzania. We met a number of stakeholders and hosted a number of workshops, including meetings and working directly with 7 private security companies, 29 civil society organizations, 1 local authority, 7 corporate clients, and 15 humanitarian clients. The reporting on those missions and the content of our activities certainly helped us generate a stronger CSA this year, and also helped us improve our own capacity building efforts with regard to our membership to ensure compliance with International Code of Conduct. It also should be underscored that these field missions have been, I think, essential for the association to the extent it provides us a hands-on direct visibility of the operations of security companies in contexts which we would otherwise not see. And it also allows us to have a much better understanding of what the challenges are in country with regard to implementation of the Code of Conduct. There is naturally an overlap of the issues of concern for security providers in different contexts, but we must also recognize that each context provides its own set of challenges and particular characteristics. So experiences in South Sudan are comparable to those in Kenya, but certainly quite distinguishable from those in Iraq and Nigeria. So our continued global footprint, as well as field missions where possible, post-COVID-19, will be crucial to keep building our capacity building, or to keep working on our capacity building for the association. Our complaints mechanism has been up and running since January 2017. The complaints form, as we know, is available in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. The complaints mechanism is crucial to allow individuals who feel aggrieved by private security companies to bring their grievances to the association. And there are a number of procedures have been developed to help us address those complaints and to manage the situation. The details are on this particular slide, and I hope you can see them all. There are more details provided in our annual report. I think it is important to note that the majority of complaints have been against non-member companies, as well as, I dare say, within that section, against maritime security companies. And most of those have been focused on non-payment of services as well as working conditions. We follow up closely with regard to member companies and affiliates, as we naturally have jurisdiction over our membership and our affiliate companies. And to date, there have been no major complaints that we've had to resolve with any of our member companies. However, it is good to note that with the association's complaint mechanism being up and running since January 2017, we're meeting one of the requirements, which is strengthened monitoring, at some level accountability, but certainly greater transparency in how we manage these situations and we handle allegations. And even for those situations, which are the majority of those we have received over the past 2-3 years, that have been with regard to member companies which have not met the threshold of a complaint, these have allowed us to interact with those security companies on issues which fall below a complaint level within the code of conduct, but also to address any particular grievances or concerns that guards and or communities may have had with those security companies, and to there have a dialogue with the management of our member companies or affiliates to address these issues. So each of the set of allegations or communications and or complaints that we receive from individuals help us develop that interaction with our security companies. Unfortunately, for those companies which are outside of our remit, it is difficult for us to do the necessary follow-up and to have that level of dialogue, which is why we would encourage nonetheless greater transparency, greater engagement by other governments, and the growth of the membership base with regard to security companies joining the association, as well as a greater involvement by the clients, les donneurs d'ordre, as we say in French. And importantly, to note, as part of our capacity building this year as well, we developed with GISF, the Global Interagency Security Forum, an association of 125 humanitarian aid agencies worldwide, a new model of security to go, a risk management toolkit for humanitarian agencies. This particular document is a detailed procurement type toolkit for humanitarian agencies that are considering to hire security providers for the security of their operations in various environments, and then takes them through the various steps that they should follow, including referencing to the International Code of Conduct and to membership to the association in the selection and monitoring of their private security providers. This toolkit was issued in November of this year, and it was a successful cooperation with GISF on this toolkit, one of our observers. And I will certainly recommend all members to refer to this toolkit and to digest the recommendations within the toolkit as a practical example of capacity building, not only with regard to our security companies that work with us, but in particular to the communities that are actually using and hiring security companies. Many of the steps that we highlight in this toolkit are relevant to a range of clients, not simply humanitarian agencies, and include, of course, corporate clients, commercial clients, private individuals, as well as governments. So certainly a very, very important tool, and we have received very positive feedback on this tool so far. Secondly, we have been engaging quite substantially over the past few months with multinational corporations for a number of reasons, to have multinational corporations, MSCs, develop a better awareness and understanding of the code of conduct, but for us to work very closely with them to have them insert the necessary reference to the International Code of Conduct and the association as part of their own procurement policies, their corporate social responsibility, and their human rights work. This work with multinational corporations will certainly pick up moving into 2021 and 2022, given the latest developments in the European Union on the potential development of a directive on mandatory human rights due diligence, as well as here in Switzerland, following a referendum yesterday with a particular focus on human rights due diligence and corporate responsibility, as well as the latest trends we're seeing through the United Nations in the potential development of a treaty on corporate responsibility. All those issues are relevant to the work of the association to the extent that there is a supply chain involving security providers, in particular in complex environments. So we look forward to continuing to engage with multinational corporations on these matters, and would certainly welcome a stronger bilateral engagement with a number of multinationals to ensure that the security component of their human rights due diligence is taken into account fully as part of their own processes. And last but not least, in sort of the general objectives, communication. For those of you who've not seen, we have updated our website to make it much more user-friendly and targeting and developing key messages to create a better understanding of the work of the association and its members, to provide a better profile of the work of the association and of the issues that we're dealing with, and also to have a much more dynamic sort of dialogue-based website to allow for greater communication with key stakeholders on the work of the association. In addition, as the chair mentioned at the beginning of this assembly, we have invested time and resources into having a stronger communication footprint as part of our strategic plan. So on our YouTube channel, we presently have 24 videos, which have been viewed over 2,500 times. Our podcast series on future security trends, implication for human rights, we now have 8 episodes and over 570 downloads of those episodes. And our LinkedIn membership has grown by over 50%, up to over 1,200 followers during the reporting period. These are just examples, but clearly our communication footprint and also the reactive communication footprint we're receiving from the number of inquiries from journalists, from academics and other observers who are looking to understand more about the association, its work and the human rights issues with regards to the private security contracting world in different contexts. So certainly much more work to be done on communication, but it has been a heavy lift over the past few months, in particular given COVID-19, and in particular given that we wanted to strengthen the focus on these issues despite the presence of a pandemic in many locations. Mr. Chair, I'll turn to a couple of the regulatory points at this stage in terms of the financial situation of the association and some general comments. As part of this AGA, Mr. Chair, we need to approve the 2019 audited accounts and the 2019 auditor's report, which are presently online. The association, to leverage experience gained last year with its auditors, have maintained Bernet and Associés to perform the audit of the 2020 accounts. This likewise will need to be approved by the AGA. With regard to this year's financial situation, the 2020 budget will not be balanced, given a slight downturn in government contributions. The shortfall, nonetheless, can be met by the strategic reserves. This will need to be approved by the AGA. I would like to indicate for the record, Mr. Chair, that over the past few months, working closely with all board members of the association, and in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that I think many of us have felt economically, much work has gone into limiting the costs and expenses of the association, finding ways to save a few Swiss francs, if I dare say, and ensure that we're meeting the expectations of our membership, notwithstanding some of the restrictions financially that we were experiencing during this particular period. So the fact that we fall with a small deficit of between 70 and 90,000 Swiss francs this year is a positive end of year, I dare say, despite it being a deficit. Nonetheless, it should be noted that given our 2018 decision to put in place strategic reserves, especially to cater for unpredictable situations and maintain operational viability of ICoCA in crisis or unexpected situations, this deficit is manageable and will not have a major impact on the operations of the association. In summary form, Mr. Chair, the revenues update, the 2020 budget figures as of 30 September 2020. Joining fees so far received 19,300 Swiss francs. Membership dues and reserve fees approximately 537,000 Swiss francs. Government contributions restricted at 475,000 Swiss francs. I'd particularly like to note the contributions from the Swiss government as well as the UK FCO in supporting the activities and core activities of the association this year. And in addition, unrestricted contributions from the government of Sweden amounting to 100,000 Swiss franc. So our revenues for 2020 as of would be at 1.131.863 million Swiss francs for the year. The expenses update, I will not go through each and every single line. These are available online. To note that at the time of reporting, we are very much on track to meet the full implementation requirements of the budget with no major overspend in any particular sector. And I'm hopeful that as we reach the end of the year, we'll be within that deficit and maybe a bit less as we close the books for 2020. Budget breakdown by type of expenses. You see the majority has been focused on operations at 52%. We have naturally expanded our communication and fundraising efforts and the budget in that regard, given the need to have greater visibility of the work of the association and in light of the potential economic downturn that we'll see going into 2021 and 2022. And to conclude, Mr. Chair, presentation of the report at this stage, as we move into 2021, to indicate that we do not anticipate a substantial growth of the budget into 2021, given the current unpredictable financial situation linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. As such, the association will elaborate a conservative budget based on previous year's expenses, so on similar levels as we have had over the past couple of years. In terms of revenues, the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to have a negative economic impact going into 2021, which at this stage is too soon to fully assess what that economic impact will look like. As such, we'll be keeping a close eye on these matters and strengthen our fundraising efforts to ensure that we have a balanced budget for 2021. And last but not least, the membership invoices for next year were sent out in mid-November in line with the financial cycle of the association. Mr. Chair, this concludes in summary form the annual report for the period 1 November 2019 until 31 October 2020. As this is the first session of the General Assembly this week, no doubt we'll have plenty of opportunities to come back to elements of the annual report, and the full annual report will be made available online at the end of the annual General Assembly. Mr. Chair, with my thanks, I cede the floor back to you.